digital lottery in front of us, but we don't have, we have your report.
Yeah.
We're always live, but just for the public, we're now live. Welcome everybody to Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs. It is Friday, January 9th. It's astonishing to me how fast the year's already going. And we are here today following up on a report that we asked for last year, on a report that, on a subject that has long engaged many people in the state, and which we are hoping we may make some progress on one way or the other. So we welcome Nick Gormley, who's the
New Deputy Commissioner.
The new Deputy Commissioner of
Department
of Economic Development, and also the co-chair of the Convention Center and Performance-Based Task Force that we created last session. So, and I believe we have online Jeff Lawson, who was your co-chair, is that correct? So we say, hello, Jeff.
What is the new ballroom
Hello, Jeff.
for the State House being put in?
Well, I'm sorry.
When is the new ballroom for the State House being put in?
Oh, that's right.
I don't know, that's
into, we have the report on our website, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I don't have it.
Yeah, I'm waiting for, we have it on the website, but not on post for today, so I'm getting it as soon as possible, and just waiting for it real quick.
Oh, great.
And
So,
then I'll have it, sorry.
correct. No, it's terrific. It's fun. Nick, do you know all of us?
I know a few of you, but it would be great to, do some introduction.
Allison Clarkson.
Brady Brock, Dave Weeks.
And Tom Rutland, yeah, and Tom, who served with you,
Yes.
isn't able to be here this week. And I apologize to Tom because I should have saved this, but I was really trying to get things we needed to potentially want to include in an economic development committee bill,
Mhm.
which the deadline is January 29th. So we're having to really move fast on some of these pieces.
Mhm.
And Tom had the benefit of having served with you and sort of knows what's going on. And Keisha Ron Hinsdale, who has walking pneumonia, and I don't know if she's joining us, but okay, great. I'm here.
Excellent.
It's yours.
Well, good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Nick Grimley, Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Economic Development. As part of my role, I serve as the co-chair for the Vermont Convention Center and Performing Arts Venue Task Force, along with Jess Vintner from the agency. We provide the administrative lead for the task force, coordinating meetings, compiling materials, documenting the discussions and outputs of the task force. A little bit of background. Task force was created last year by the legislature through Act 65. The charge was to study the feasibility of a convention center and a performing arts venue in the state of Vermont. We have produced an interim report, which was delivered in November, and drafted and shared by the committee, provides a progress update and reflects the themes and insights and areas for further inquiry by the task force. Just some sort of a housekeeping issue before we really get into the substance. The enabling statute limited the task force to 6 meetings.
Sorry about that.
And yet it runs through November of this year. So one of the things that we're asking for is a technical correction to allow the task force to continue meeting until the November final report deadline. And I believe that Jess Vintner has provided some proposed technical correction language to House Commerce. And I'm sure she'd be willing to send that along to this committee as well.
That would be great. So you were limited to 6 meetings?
Yes.
I hate limiting things.
Yeah.
Particularly with you had two legislators on it, wasn't a huge burden on our.
Did you exercise all six?
January will be our 6th meeting.
Right. So you would, we'd like to lift the cap altogether, or do you have a notion of how many more meetings you think you
I
need?
think that, you know, a once a month cadence, has worked out well for the task force so far. And we would look to continue that through November of 2026.
Okay, great, terrific. Great.
All right. From a high level summary, the interim report summarizes the work that we've conducted since July of 2025. And I'll highlight some key focus areas and then really sort of defer to the actual report for, you know, the written detail of that.
And Nick, as we launch into this has got a huge tail. I mean, this has got a background that's, you know, years, maybe decades old. Vermont looking at a convention center and where it might be located and all our capacity issues, which is what you looked at. Can you just give us a notion as to the beginning of when we actually started to have a conversation about the convention center?
I don't know that I mean,
You guys didn't discuss the history of this
I
conversation?
think I should say that I came into the co-chair role probably 2 or 3 meetings into the task force. Deputy Commissioner Brett Long was originally assigned to this, and then once there were some changes within the department, we rearranged a few things. That possibly could have been covered. I know that from just my general knowledge, having been in the state and working in commercial real estate and development and other areas for a long time, that this is something that has been talked about for quite a long time around the state. So one of the earliest and most important points of consensus by the task force was that, you know, convention centers and performing arts venues really should be treated separately. And there are some reasons for that. We reached out to a number of national experts, and they keyed us in that, you know, they have really distinct market dynamics. The infrastructure needs for these 2 types of venues are different. The audience behavior is different. For instance, convention center attendees, they want to be very close to, the airport, close to a walkable downtown. Performance arts venues, people are more willing to drive longer.
Those are different audiences.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was early areas of this. Jeff Lawson, who's the co-chair and joining virtually, can speak further, including on the work that his group Hello Burlington is doing with the Hunden Group and their feasibility study that's currently underway. So why the separation matters. Convention centers really depend on heavy proximity to a large amount of hotel capacity. They require ease of access to logistics, transportation to and from airports.
Or transportation. Not always
Transportation.
necessarily an airport. I'm cognizant of our Rutland
Sure.
contingent here.
And then the performance art venues, as I mentioned, audiences are much more tolerant of travel and the different demands, different scheduling that they see. But both certainly can be, economic and cultural assets, but they function very differently. In terms of market and competitive context, some of the things that Vermont currently lacks, a modern, flexible venue for large conventions, which is one of the things that we're exploring, a year-round scalable cultural performance facility. Some of the strengths that have been identified, Vermont's authenticity and our brand appeal are really a strong asset for both, convention center and performing arts venue. Constraints that have been noted, certainly limited hotel capacity and then limited direct air access compared to some of the regional competitors.
And limited rail access, I would say.
Climate also considered?
I'm sorry.
Is climate also been considered? For example, when you try to schedule a large event in wintertime, snowstorms and the like impede transportation, impede the ability to get around and start coming. And so
Yes.
do you find that a convention center compared to other places has limited utility in terms of just the number of days per year?
I could certainly see that as, you know, a potential limiting factor. It was not one that was really brought up by some of the experts that we, you know, that
Well,
we
I mean,
brought
for
into
example,
the committee.
how many people would plan an event in Vermont in January, February, or early March, for example?
Yeah, I think that's certainly a topic that we should explore as we continue our work.
Well, particularly as you start projecting potential revenues and use, I think that would be something that would have to be taken into account.
In terms of infrastructure and other economic considerations that we've initially explored, but we feel that there's more work ahead for us. Some of the early themes, lodging capacity, transportation access, downtown amenities, potential benefits that we've discussed, year-round tourism. We do think that, you know, even though we do have seasonality in the state, that there is potential for year-round tourism. I think it would certainly just depend on the types of events that you're bringing in. Downtown vitality, you know, looking at different areas with strong downtowns, and then, you know, is there enough capacity and workforce-wise in the hospitality and cultural sectors to feed the need. Governance and operating models is one of the future focuses for the task force. We've touched on it a little bit, but we see it as a major phase of the work going forward.
Governance, is that also, sorry, I didn't interrupt, but is governance also ownership? Because convention centers are often owned by municipalities, not by the state. It's governed, so are you considering governance as
part of that
ownership?
Yeah, certainly.
Because does the revenue go to?
Right. So, you know, Vermont faces a unique challenge in that, you know, we don't have a county level governance structure. That doesn't mean to say that that is the only way that you could possibly do something like this. We are looking to explore all models, whether it be public-private partnership, economic development oriented entities. But we feel that deeper exploration is really needed here. We also recognize that there is another task force that is looking at, from a broader standpoint, the county level governance.
Yes, although sadly, it did not meet, I don't believe it met this summer. I don't think it has new chairs.
I'm not sure.
I'm not pretty sure. But we can double check because that whole regional conversation and county conversation was begun by one set of chairs and passed obviously by the legislature, but neither of them returned. Well, anyway, it doesn't matter. It just hasn't been meeting. And so I think that's a good reminder to get to light a fire under that maybe for this summer and continue that conversation.
Yeah, and then certainly because it seems to be something that, you know, it affects much more than just a convention center.
Oh,
yeah. Looking ahead, over the next 11 months, the task force can continue to meet. evaluate site and scale options, examine funding and governance structures, and then coordinate with external feasibility studies and consultants. All of this work will go to inform the final report, which is due in November of 26. And then the findings and recommendations we will provide findings and recommendations for legislative consideration through that final report. I would just say in closing that the interim report that we've produced reflects the progress and information gathering that we've done, framing the core questions regarding this.
It was very helpful.
And identifying areas of deeper analysis.
Any questions of Nick before we move to Jeff?
No, I think
Okay, then Jeff, we would turn to you to add anything you would like to. Welcome to Sunday. Stay right there, because we'll have unless you'd like to turn your chair so you can see Jeff. Okay. Jeff, welcome. And if you'd be kind enough, you heard our introductions earlier?
Yes, I did.
Great. Welcome. Thank you so much for co-chairing this. Thank you for your work for Hello Burlington. And we would welcome any additional thoughts you had, because I think this initial interim report is very helpful in terms of framing out some of the challenges, some of the limiting capacity issues that we have, separating out the two questions of performance space and convention space, convention center. And anyway, anything else you'd like to add, we'd appreciate it.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. Apologies, I couldn't be there in person this morning, but thanks for having me here virtually. Yeah, the convention center conversation, as you had indicated, has percolated up several times over the last few decades. The first study we have a record of at the Lake Champlain Chamber is 1997, with Ernst & Young doing a study for the chamber, followed by 2000.
Hold on a second. 1997 was our first conversation about this.
First one we found a record of, anyway. Yeah. 2005. There was. I'm sorry, ma'am.
Look how much progress we've made.
Yeah. Well, it's a big question and a big project. I don't think it's unusual that these things take time, and there's multiple iterations of comprehensive studies. I think the tipping point in this case for us in the greater Burlington area was the fact that we've seen our hotel room inventory increase significantly. Between 25 and 27, downtown Burlington's hotel room inventory will actually increase by 50%, putting that up over the 1,000-room hotel inventory threshold, which is kind of a key number to suggest we might be ready to support a piece of infrastructure like this. Some of the other pieces that were a big factor in initiating this are the process that Hello Burlington undertook to contract with a consulting firm out of Chicago, was also being connected with the Vermont Captive Insurance Association, who hosts their annual meeting in South Burlington, and has really struggled over the last few years to keep that meeting going, as it's just growing and growing, and they want to continue to grow, but they're outgrowing all the facilities that we have in our neck of the woods to accommodate them. Obviously, that's a pretty important piece of tax revenue generated in that industry, so we want to be helpful there.
Right, critically important. What is the capacity? What did your committee guess was the current capacity of a smaller convention? Because we do host conventions, they're just much smaller than a big convention.
Yeah.
So what is our current capacity, both in terms of size that we can currently host, i.e. captive insurance is a good example. Yeah. And what is our hotel capacity at the moment?
Yeah. So the largest meeting facility in the state is the DoubleTree by Hilton in South Burlington. That has 300, I believe it's 311 hotel rooms. And I can actually get you the square footage specs on all. And so, yeah, my point though, is that's one of the problems, complexities with convention centers, is attendees typically are fairly lazy, and they don't want to have to travel too far from their lodging to the actual conference center. So when we're limited in scale of the largest property there alone, it can become really challenging. We'll typically look at our sweet spot as around 250 to 300. VCIA is a tremendous outlier. That's, as I understand it, about 11 or 1,200 attendees for 3 days. So there's a tremendous amount of overflow into the market to other nearby and adjacent lodging properties. But again, that's a real outlier and one that takes a lot of collaborative effort amongst the various lodging opportunities downtown. The other piece as to why we actually decided to take a move on this is that our tourism industry has actually been seeing some downward trends over the last couple of years. Coming out of the pandemic, we were one of those secondary, tertiary cities with just proximity to the outdoors. We saw a lot of white hot demand as revenge travel kind of uncorked itself. And over 24 and 25, we've actually seen a decline, pretty significant in 25 of leisure travel demand. So we started to look at this as an opportunity to drive business, not just on the weekends, which traditionally are strong, but are starting to drop a bit, but to drive business in our region between Sunday night and Thursday night. Obviously, these are quieter points of time, but also, you know, when you book hotel rooms during midweek, they generate the same amount of tax revenue as one on the weekend. So we're just looking at this as a way to push back against the drops in leisure demand that we're seeing right now.
The second biggest capacity is the Sheraton, or what was the Sheraton? Is that called something else?
That is the same property. It used to be the Sheraton.
Right. Sorry. And the hotel downtown, is that a Hyatt or a Hilton?
That is Hotel Champlain is a Hilton property.
And what's that capacity?
I think they're 257 rooms in terms of the square footage of ballroom assembly. I can get you that info. I don't think they're the second biggest. I think that might go to Stowe, Killington, or Jay Peak, actually, but I think they're third largest in the state. Yeah.
Any questions? Great. So I'm so glad we're having this conversation because it's potentially a huge economic development driver for us, as you indicated. It looks, given this initial interim report, it does, at least initially, look as if we're focusing on the Burlington area for this, just because of the hotel capacity and the transportation, both rail and air. We would love to have a secondary convention center in Rutland, and that may be possible at some point, but it does look like you're focusing primarily on that. Have you begun to talk to developers at all, or the Champlain Fairground, in terms of looking at some of those buildings and that could be further developed to accommodate either a performance venue of significance, even if we did redevelop the downtown auditorium tomorrow? It's not a capacity, I don't think, anymore that is significant, is enough for what we're looking at. Did you set a sort of target at the performance venue and what it would need to be able to accommodate a number of people?
Just to be clear before I get into the answer, on the task force side, no, we haven't really gotten into anything approaching site selection. On the Hello Burlington's convention center study, we've started to look at a couple of places that might be viable candidates, but really haven't done the deep dive to assess what's going to be the best potential site for, say, a performing arts center or for a convention center. There are a couple that really jump out as obvious contenders. The Macy's building downtown, for example, is quite literally surrounded by those 1,000 hotel rooms in the downtown core, and will be vacant this summer after Burlington High School concludes its current academic year. That's all, you know, obvious. That makes it an obvious candidate for us in our neck of the woods. The LL Bean building is there. University Mall parcel in South Burlington is there. Any of those seems like something that could be developed either into convention center or performing arts center. But we haven't really done the deep digging to say this is the spot. We have had some interest from private real estate developers in this conversation, but that level of interest is really about doing a couple more phases of this study work to just sort of dial in a little bit deeper rather than commit right off.
Right.
Madam
Yeah.
Chair?
Oh, welcome. Senator Von Hinsdale has joined us.
Yes. Well, yeah, I mean, and I jumped in a little bit late, but I also want to make sure we don't forget the rest of Chittenden County. As we have this conversation, first of all, I'd be happy to invite the committee to a reception at the Pizzagalli Center at Shelburne Museum coming up that is for Experience Shelburne. We can't forget that a lot of our communities outside of Burlington also have a lot of infrastructure and capacity, and want to be part of this conversation too. Just like I would see Killington as a more suitable location for some of what we're talking about, maybe than downtown Rutland for in some ways. And I say that as somebody who goes to downtown Rutland all the time with my kids. But we're going to have to make sure the conversation doesn't sound like it's centering on just a couple places. So I wanted to say that first and foremost. And then, just recognize that I don't think there's going to be one silver bullet, like one location. Keep in mind, there was going to be a performing arts venue in the south end of Burlington where Burton's location had been. And that was fought to the point of the Supreme Court by some of those neighbors. Downtown Burlington, I have raised in committee before, faces some of the same threats, including from a former state employee who is suing over the 200 units of housing next to the mall for, I think, the sixth time now, and getting the city involved. So I just want to make sure when we talk about this, we bring it back to our permit conversations, because that's going to be our job in all of this, is not to pick favorites, I think, but to make sure that we are helping the state and our regulations get out of the way of this progress.
I really appreciate that, Keisha. And I think, particularly because, as we've seen with many of our there's more carrying a scale that is substantial, but there are retreats and gatherings that are 100 or fewer that are very appropriate for places that have smaller, have less capacity. But you're absolutely right. Rutland, Killington, Stowe, we have great opportunities currently for conventions of smaller scale businesses, and I think we would all appreciate the task force sort of taking on and looking at scale so that as the state could market different size conventions or gatherings and market accordingly.
Yeah, if I may, I just jump in and say there really are several different avenues in the meeting and conference industry, and we can start to appeal to all of them. To Senator Rom Hinsdale's point, yes, smaller meetings like corporate board retreats, incentive travel, that kind of thing is really well suited to smaller venues, especially resort towns, whether those are lakeside resorts or mountain resorts. Makes a lot of sense for those. For the scale of what we were looking at with our convention center study, it's association and corporate business. These are events that are up over 500-600 people attending. It's a much larger piece of infrastructure that in almost every single case we've seen requires municipal involvement, if not municipal ownership.
Right. Thank you.
I would say too, just very quickly, Senator Rom Hinsdale, you missed the part in the beginning where Nick was able to underscore the kind of the difference between the Performing Arts Center and the convention question.
Yeah.
I think a place like Shelburne, I think, would be dynamite for a Performing Arts Center. I've been a Shelburne resident for 25 years, and I love going to those concerts.
Well, and municipal involvement is really different than municipal alignment. That is a stumbling block in Newport. That's a stumbling block in Burlington. The state has to, I think, be very clear in projects like Hula. We have to start naming names and saying we can't put time, energy, money, attention into something and then have our own regulatory system sabotage its ability to happen.
Right.
Agreed.
Thank you. I think the ask I hear is for in our economic bill to have an extension for the task force's work and so that they have enough time to complete it by November 26th. Thank you both very much. We'll look forward to any additions from Tom when he returns. Thank you both. And continue, and we really appreciate your work. Thank you very much. Yes. Great. So we are going to pivot to cannabis, and we welcome to the table, to the conversation, Pepper and whoever else Pepper.
Yeah, you mind if I bring
all three of
the
you.
whole board is here.
Wow, the entire Cannabis Control Board. How exciting.
You mind
Yeah, come on up. And Tom's chair is available too, because Tom is with us. It is wonderful to have you. We have much to discuss and much. So we have not only your current needs, we also have additional needs that are coming possibly down the pipe from the federal government. And we have your guidelines that we need to be looking. You've got quite a bit of work off session. Well, I think we are poised to need an update. We need a full update, and obviously this is just the beginning. And we were hoping to have our alleged counsel Tucker with us also, who has, I know, some input on some of the federal anything additionally that you aren't able to provide. But why don't we? I think you remember all of us, Alan and Allison Clarkson, Randy
Brock, Dave Weeks.
and Keisha Ron Hinsdale online. And if you guys,
They know me.
yeah, I know they know you. If you introduce yourselves and take it away.
Great. I'm James Pepper, Chair of the Cannabis Control Board.
Kyle Harris, one of the commissioners of the Cannabis Control Board.
Julie Holbert, another commissioner.
It's great to have you. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really great to be here, especially so early in the session. You guys have an enormous amount of work, and of course, half the time of the house to do it in. So it means a lot that you would invite us here. And it sounds to me like you might be starting a cannabis bill this year in the first half of this session, as opposed to waiting for the House to send you something from crossover, which.
Yeah, it's that timing is unclear.
Okay.
Again, I'm not sure Matt and I are scheduled to chat about that.
Okay, sorry. Well, I didn't mean to jump the gun on that. I just,
Yeah, it's a possibility.
you guys have a very different perspective than the Committee of Jurisdiction in the House, which is government operations. So, having an economic development lens is important for this market. So I did prepare a PowerPoint. Is it worth sharing it, or?
I think you have it here with us.
Yeah, I'm happy to just.
Which one? You have two.
So one was
These
a
are proposals and you have a
report.
PowerPoint.
So the report is a few little talking points in the PowerPoint, because this was a report that was requested specifically by this committee, the Act 56 report. So I'll have a little bit of information in the slide deck about the report that we'll talk about.
Okay, great. The plus of sharing the slides is that Keisha can see them because
Okay.
she doesn't have.
Okay, so I joined the meeting.
Perfect, I will admit you, and then you can share your screen.
This sharing is not turned on.
You said that, permission, sorry.
Okay.
Should be live now.
Okay, got it. Great, thank you. And nice to meet you in person. Yes.
Oh, sorry, Kiara Mead.
We've been exchanging emails. She's been accommodating my tardiness already.
No worries.
Let's see what we got here. Okay, so there are quite a few slides here, but I'm going to just move quickly because a lot of it is background stuff you guys already know. This is just the basic timeline of the kind of evolution of cannabis policy in Vermont, leading up to 2022, where the first sales of regulated cannabis were occurring. This is the board, and our job, we're an independent executive branch agency, and our job at a very high level is to safely, equitably, and effectively implement the laws that administer the cannabis medical and adult use programs. Every state, because this is illegal federally, kind of choose their own adventure as to what the market is going to look like, what they want to prioritize. And you all did some very unique things. I think which have had dramatic impacts about where we've ended up, 3 years in versus other states. So these are three of some notable pieces, but there are certainly plenty others. One, instead of trying to stamp out the illicit market, you actually wanted to invite them into the regulated market. You wanted their genetics in, you wanted to, a lot of states just say, we're gonna let big business kind of compete with the illicit market. We said, illicit market, you come in and kind of form the backbone of this industry. And then that wouldn't have been possible if you, did what most other states say, which is if you have a felony conviction, you can't get a cannabis license. Especially for kind of, drug convictions. Because a lot of the legacy market, it's part of what goes with being a legacy operator is, having involvement with the criminal justice system around cannabis issues particularly. So you gave us some flexibility on the kind of criminal history records and who's eligible to get a cannabis license. And then one kind of hallmark of the legislation, this is first in the country, is you said, no stacking of licenses. You can't franchise. You can't have 5 cultivation licenses. You can't have 5 retail licenses. You only get 1 of each. And that's different than every other state. So you can see just the number of licenses historically from July 2023 to December 2025. There's this peak that you might see around, it starts in January, February, March of 2025. That's when we voted as a board to close the retail application window and the cultivation window. So we're not currently issuing new cultivation or retail licenses. And we wrote in our rules that we would always give the industry at least 30 days notice before we actually stop accepting for the people that might be, partially through a build out of their operation or something along those lines. And we saw, predictably, but it wasn't terrible, kind of a rush through the door. When the industry, kind of all the prospective licensees heard that we were not going to be issuing new licenses, a lot of people jumped in and down. So that's why there's that kind of peak in the early.
And just remind me, licenses are renewed every 2 years or every 1 year?
Annual. Yeah.
But then it tapered off. It's almost back where it was.
Yes. Yeah. We're kind of, yes, that's kind of a normal level. I mean, those are our most popular license types, as you can see from this slide, retail and cultivation. So now when people exit the market with one of those licenses, they're not being replaced by new licenses. So this is just a breakdown, also by priority status. One thing that you asked us to do was prioritize for licensure folks that have been disproportionately harmed by cannabis prohibition in the past. And so that's the kind of social equity, the terminology that we use for those types of applicants. That's represented by the blue on this graph. The board and the legislature recognize there's certain other kind of marginalized groups that probably deserve some amount of priority as well. So we call those economic empowerment. Those are veteran-owned businesses, First American-owned businesses, women-owned businesses. And those are represented by green on this graph, and the standard applicants are orange. This is the retail locations by county. I think one issue that you all have heard of a few times is that there's intense retail clustering in certain areas, Rutland City being one of them, Burlington. And really that isn't predictable outgrowth of another portion of the law, which was that a town cannot sell cannabis. They can't have a retail location unless they affirmatively opt in with a vote. And quota of citizens. And so I think we have around 80 or 90 towns that have opted in, and those become the kind of hubs for cannabis retail. That's where people have to go. So, well, Burlington has 14, South Burlington and Wilson both have 0 retail locations. Because neither of them have opted into retail. And I should say a town can opt out with a subsequent vote. But we've also paused issuing new retail licenses, so the density problem, at least in the short run, is not going to be exacerbated by new retailers. We have just a huge amount of ingenuity in our market and expertise. This somewhat represents that. As you can see, we have to register products before they ever hit the market. To make sure that they're compliant on packaging, that we've looked through their certificates of analysis and testing results, make sure they're not appealing to youth, all the kind of bells and whistles of the regulatory system. We have over 5,000 registered unique products in Vermont. That is incredible diversity of products. The vast majority of them are kind of individual strains of cannabis, unique strains, but
so each strain is considered a different product.
Yeah. Every product that needs to get tested separately has its own registration. But you can see on the kind of far right side that the kind of the categories of products that we have: vape cartridges, concentrates, edibles, infused pre-rolls, tinctures, foams, topicals. So we also oversee the medical program. As you may recall, the medical program, once the adult use program opened up, really saw a drop off in patients. And as a result, a lot of the medical dispensaries started to close, leaving a lot of the patients that required medical services, the kind of unique services that are only available in the medical program, out of luck, essentially. What the legislature did in 2024 was merge adult use and medical. They said that the adult use retailers could serve medical patients, including the kind of medical products, if they subjected themselves to enhanced regulation, including increased education for the people that are interacting with patients, maintaining confidentiality of patients, and just having product segregation and procedures to make sure that we're collecting taxes for the recreational sales, not for the medical sales, and that we're not having a merging of adult use because the consumers purchasing medical products.
And was there an alignment? I mean, I should probably remember this, but was there an alignment in communities that had hosted medical dispensaries with their acceptance and choosing to opt in for cannabis sales?
That was early on, yes. All of the early medical dispensaries received an integrated license, and that was part of the ballot question: was, are you going to allow the integrated licensees? That's part of the opt-in vote.
Yeah. So one assumes that there's more acceptance once they've hosted a medical dispensary.
Right. So we're seeing for the first time since 2017 a slight uptick in the number of medical patients, and medical patients are having unprecedented access to their products. Essentially, there were 6 medical dispensaries around the state at the kind of height of the medical program, and now we have 22 of these kind of merged programs, merged retailers. Compliance data, of course, a big part of our work is regulating the market and keeping people in compliance with the regulations. This is just a snapshot of our compliance work in 2025. Number of inspections lead to investigations and compliance actions. We received 442 complaints in 2025. Those complaints, of those, 162 were investigated. And then LOW means a letter of warning, and NOV means a notice of violation. And we had a few court cases as well.
Sorry, what is LOW again?
It's a letter of warning.
Letter.
And that's really, you know, we try for the somewhat unintentional violations or, you know, this is a new industry and it's comprised by many people that have never been subjected to regulation before. So we try to take an education first approach for kind of unintentional violations, you know, unintentional advertising violations, things like that. So that's why the letters of warning is usually our first step when we see kind of a first time offender. This just gives you a nature of what some of these complaints were: advertising violations, business operations, you know, illegal products. You know, it's nice that diversion isn't a huge number, huge driver of the complaints.
What's diversion?
It's selling legally grown cannabis in illegal markets. And then the opposite of that is inversion, which we also have to keep an eye out for, which is trying to bring in illegally grown cannabis into the regulated market.
Sorry, forgive me, but how does one see that here?
So you,
Maybe it's just so small I can't see.
it's very possible, yeah. Are you looking, one thing that I noticed, and I need to just fix this with Kiara, is that I was pulling slides from a different presentation that I gave, and some of the slides were hidden. So,
Okay.
so you may not have this slide, but if you don't,
We have it.
I will.
The y-axis chart,
We have that.
yes, the diversion is on the x-axis. Right there.
Oh, okay, this is hard to see. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
I was just, so diversion is diverted, legally grown, but illegally sold.
Right, if you were a cannabis cultivator and you were kind of selling half your product to a retailer or a wholesaler, and the other half was going out the back door to, you know, whomever. This just kind of gives you a sense of what our administrative penalties would look like in 2025. And I think this represents an increase. I mean, I say we take an education first approach. At some point, we have to start taking a kind of more hardline approach especially for people that have received letters of warning in the past for the same behavior. So we do have the authority to issue administrative penalties for violations of regulations.
And is that in rules or is that statute of how many? I mean, I want to assume we would not have that statute. How many?
No, yeah, you just gave us the authority to administer, or, you know, to issue administrative penalties. And
We have a rule dedicated to it, and there's different categories of violations, so depending on the violation, we've got some kind of pre-slotted thoughts on penalties and what penalties should be associated with various different violations.
so some trends. One trend is that our revenue is exceeding all of the early projections pretty significantly. This is the joint fiscal forecast from January 2023. The market has been open since October 1st of 2022. And these are the projections that they thought that the cannabis excise tax would bring in. And then these are the actuals. This is the July 2025. So, you know, 2023, we exceeded the projections by 43%, FY24 by 76%, FY25 by 40%. We are seeing, as you can see from this forecast, and I'm sure, I don't know if it's been updated for January yet, the consensus revenue forecast. So this is the July one from 2025. They've projected out through FY30. And you see a leveling off, and that's to be expected, of course. And I mean, one thing that's happened is New York has finally issued retail licenses. So we have a long string of retailers right on the border of Vermont, on the western border, that are kind of all those consumers that used to be driving to Vermont or to Rutland are now just staying at home. So I keep picking on Rutland. But, you know, that's you know,
So
kind of
Whitehall is now, I haven't actually noticed Whitehall being awash with.
Yeah.
There is one right by the outlets. You know, the outlets right
In
before you
Lake
get on.
George?
Yeah, right before you get on strip mall.
There is.
7.
That's right, but that's not Whitehall, that's right on the border.
Yeah.
It's Queensbury.
Ian,
I just know there's one there. but-
yes, I pass it.
So this is, just another way of showing the
So
revenue.
before we leave the revenue,
Yeah.
would you just be kind enough to remind the committee and the public where the revenue goes?
Of course, yes. So there's a 14% cannabis excise tax. 30% of that, whatever that brings in, is put into a special fund that is used for prevention strategies. That's usually dictated by the Department of Health through its Substance Misuse Advisory Council. The other 70% of the excise tax goes directly to the general fund. And then there's a 6% sales tax that goes to another special fund that's dedicated exclusively to supporting after-school programs. So it's administered by the Agency of Education. And then towns, if they have a local option tax, get to keep that 1%.
And you are paid,
From the general fund.
your administration comes out of the 70% to the
That's
general
right.
fund.
Well, yes, I mean, we're,
You pay your administrative costs first and then the rest goes.
no, that's historically how it happened and then it changed last year.
Yes, unfortunately.
Yeah, so no, our licensing fees and administrative penalties, pay for our budget and whatever the delta is between our operating expenses and what those bring in is paid from the general fund directly. So,
Sorry, it's helpful, I think, for the public, and for us to just be reminded.
Right.
Oddly, it is one of the biggest questions we get, I mean, at least I get, is where does that cannabis revenue go?
yes. Yes, well, it goes,
After school prevention and into the general fund.
That's right. This is just from the Department of Tax, and they have a cannabis excise tax tracker. This just kind of shows FY 23 or calendar year 23, 24, and 25. And you can just see, the only thing that's interesting here to me is that we are, continuing to grow every year. And that there are these seasonalities to our sales, with ski season and leaf peeping season being, drivers of cannabis sales, or just kind of times when cannabis sales are at a height, and mud season, stick season, they kind of go down a little bit.
You'd think with that season.
Yeah, well, people stuck in their houses, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, not, but there is an alignment with your spikes in sales with, I think, with sports betting. It would be interesting to do an alignment study on that, because I believe that there is a big alignment in terms of the ski season.
We're kind of in an inverse relationship with alcohol nationally in a lot of ways. As cannabis revenue goes up, alcohol revenue generally goes down. And, when alcohol is up, cannabis is sometimes down too. So, market dynamics and oversupply. I wanted to just kind of lay out some of the trends that we're seeing. We have a tremendous amount of outdoor cultivators compared to most states. And that is great for the environment. It's great for kind of people's ability to enter the market, but it does lead to seasonal oversupply around harvest time, where we have everyone kind of harvesting their cannabis at the same time, which leads to kind of price compression at following the harvest, smaller margins that disproportionately impacts outdoor cultivators. There is this demand volatility, which we kind of described with the cannabis revenue. We have a good amount of tourists that come and purchase cannabis here. We have home grow, so it's not like anyone didn't have a place to purchase cannabis before we had a regulated market. We do, our people that are shopping in our stores are made up of Vermonters, tourists, and then these border consumers in New Hampshire, New York, people that are coming here, that work here, but live elsewhere. So our demand for cannabis kind of fluctuates with tourists, and as other states come online, we see decreases in demand for Vermont cannabis.
David,
Did you see a dip when New York retail came online?
It was hard to notice. We did see a slowing of the growth, especially compared to the FY, the consensus revenue for the most recent. So they thought the market was going to grow about 9% in FY 26. Right now, if the trends continue, it'll be a little bit less than 9%. It's probably a lot. I mean, it's certainly influenced by that.
And I think qualitatively, you can start to see how some of those businesses are trying to attract Vermont residents to come to New York and purchase product there, whether it's the way that they're able to advertise, how they're able to sell their product and pull it out to the public, so on and so forth. But especially in the border communities, you'll hear about somebody giving away a car as a gift if you come and enter a lottery, at a New York cannabis establishment. If you get a lottery ticket, if you purchase any weed or something like that, and the winner gets a car, like they do stuff like that.
So they do different marketing, and when we get to it, their advertising, is that a challenge for us that they advertise?
So we've heard from users that they're competing in advertising with border towns, right? So if you can have a billboard, let's say, just on the other side of the Vermont border, so everybody passes by it and you're in New York.
Only when you're not in the park.
One
You
kind
can't
of,
do that.
one kind of oddity of just the fact that this is state by state is there's actually New York cannabis companies that can advertise in Vermont in ways that Vermont companies cannot advertise. Sometimes we get complaints about a 7 days article or something like that, and it's because it's a New York company and we don't have jurisdiction.
Is that something we should be asking for reciprocity with New York?
Advertising it's an issue that gets brought up year after year after year.
We are.
Yes, and there's a lawsuit about it that's now been settled. I have to talk about that.
We're, okay.
But I think, we don't necessarily take policy positions on whether there should be more advertising, should be less advertising, whether it should be the same as New York, but this is something that's been asked, changes the advertising laws, something that's been requested every year.
Well, we understand this is a lawsuit that's still not settled. It is settled.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
It's settled. We didn't get a court ruling, which would have potentially changed the laws more significantly. But it was a settlement agreement with the plaintiffs.
Right. But if advertising is an issue with New York State, it
Right.
might be think about whether it would be beneficial or not. Maybe those policies. I mean, that we'd love to have you obviously weigh in on that.
Right.
If it was an appropriate thing to be. Yeah.
And Massachusetts too, so both
Yeah.
border states that have.
If we're looking at reciprocity, if we would have it with, because it would certainly help our Vermont growers and
Right.
dispensers and retailers.
That's right.
If we had reciprocity. So it's something for us to consider. Maybe we'd ask you to weigh in on that.
Yeah. I mean, I think where we would like to weigh in is how any changes to advertising might change our internal processes and maybe create more work or less work. But I think, having reciprocity with Massachusetts, our neighboring states and Maine potentially as well, makes a lot of sense. I have a monthly coordination call with the regulators from those 4 states in Connecticut. And we are always trying to, prepare for the possibility of maybe one day having interstate commerce and having similarity in our regulations,
It would be great if it was like a New England pack,
Exactly.
given that we now, everybody but New Hampshire.
Around New Hampshire.
So the New Hampshire's an island of sobriety.
Exactly.
Well, they have a medical program, so they were robust enough.
They have a robust medical program. But maybe it's time for a New England pack, or northern
Yeah.
cannabis, as opposed to the northern forest, which is New York State to me. Anyway, it might make some sense because
Yeah.
reciprocity on a bunch of things might make some sense.
Right.
And there's some cases moving through the federal circuit that may or may not get picked up by the Supreme Court over the Dormant Commerce Clause and cannabis's impact through the Dormant Commerce Clause and how you can do interstate commerce. So, I didn't mean to derail the flow.
So
of the
that-
presentation.
Kyle, is a big issue for the federal action, which we may be anticipating. That has a big impact on our
I
interstate commerce.
don't know if ever has slides prepared on that.
Yes.
But I think Tucker, we would ask that you and Tucker look at that.
Yes.
Because I know Tucker's been doing a dive in that.
Yes.
And Tucker Anderson being our legislative counsel, and is wisely beginning to look at exactly that challenge.
And honestly, it would make enforcement of these kind of cross-border issues easier, because then we can coordinate. We don't have to learn each other's laws. They're all the same, you know.
Right.
So, okay. I always just like to mention that this is not really like alcohol in that there are robust hemp dry market, which I'll talk a little bit about, and then there's also, the illicit market operating right alongside in parallel markets to this one. So anytime, a product is prohibited here, or you're paying 20% for regulated products, you see people shift their preferences and go to these alternative markets. I just like to point out that there is still very much illicit market competition with the regulated market.
So what is if you had to guess, or if there's maybe something measuring it, what percent of sales are done in the illicit market now compared to what they were?
Well,
What has our impact of regulation
Yeah.
and legalization had on reducing the illicit market? Because that was clearly one of the intents.
Right. So we're actually doing a study on that currently. It should be out later this month. There's national reports that say, the regulated market captures, it's somewhat hard to measure. I will say that the fact that we brought in a lot of illicit market operators, and we have kind of an exciting market, took a big bite out of the illicit market. I'm not saying we got a full capture of the illicit market. The fact that our revenue is greater than what was anticipated just shows that there is interest in the regulated market. But we actually we did kind of we're doing updating our market analysis, and that's one of the components of it, which we can share with you.
What's your best guess right now?
How many people stay on the illicit market? Well, do you consider the people that home grow and then kind of trade with their neighbors illicit market, or because there's black market, there's gray market, and that would be gray market. Is that, amongst Vermonters, I don't know, 50-50 maybe? I mean,
It's a tough thing to quantify. I think I'm sure the people behind us will mention studies at some point, or at least a study at some point that's been conducted over the course of the session. About only 30% of the national market has been captured by regulated cannabis operators, like going to dispensaries versus participating in the illicit market, whether or not you include home grow or not. I think, if you parse that number from the national average into state-specific programs and what states like Vermont have done to try and encourage illicit market operators versus other states that just look to supplant illicit market operators with big business, the numbers, the more you look at it on that kind of state-by-state basis, kind of fluctuate a little bit, but there's work to be done. I don't think, at least from my perspective, I never anticipated capturing the entire illicit market. It was, I like to say, okay, 15% of folks would come with us no matter what the regulations were. 15% of folks would never come with us no matter what the regulations were. But how can we work to make a program that benefits that middle 70% and gets them interested in participating in the legal market?
Well, if I heard correctly, your estimate right now is that you're capturing 30% of the total market. Is that correct?
I think Pepper said more closer to 50-50. I think that there are some studies that's been conducted considering the model for purchasing cannabis is very retail focused at the national level to be a little lower than that.
Okay. And is there anything being done actively to counter the illicit market?
from a law enforcement perspective, I would say not the kind of the low level deals. I mean, the Joint Drug Task Force does the trafficking, but I think the way to actually capture more of the illicit market sales is to offer the same products and services in the regulated market that the illicit market has. I mean, the reason, the cap on concentrate, potency cap on solid concentrates just gives an exclusivity lane to the illicit market to supply those products. So anyone who wants a higher potency concentrate, their only option is the illicit market. So that's, some of the market expansion ideas that have been brought to us and are in this presentation are all areas to capture more of those illicit market sales in the regulated space.
And we don't necessarily have the authority to go after illicit market operators unless it's a legal cannabis business that's engaging in illicit market activity, like the diversion part of that.
In terms of law enforcement interest in the illicit market, has that changed since there's been the creation of a non-illicit market?
Right. That was going to be my question.
I think, the state's attorneys, I feel like, are just not given the kind of court backlogs and the kind of serious crimes, they're just not going to prioritize low-level drug deals. Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking of it from a revenue perspective.
Right.
That every dollar that goes into the illicit market is a dollar less that's going into that percentage that goes to tax revenue.
Right.
So we all know that consumers are creatures of habit, right? So if we bring in illicit market operators, we have a retail location, the next thing we have to do is change the consumer behavior. So one of the things we've talked about is doing like a Why Buy Legal campaign to change consumer behavior from purchasing from to the regulated market. To your point exactly, putting more dollars into the regulated market versus the illicit purchases.
And in the illicit market right now in Vermont, can you buy the same products for substantially less than you can in the legal market?
The same products, I would say no, because ours, are tested. They're tracked from seed to sale. You can buy different products, but they're unregulated. So, the people are paying 20% premium on the regulated products. They're doing that for peace of mind and, to have an above board transaction. But, there's these whole categories of products that are not available on the regulated side. And then, of course, the price is always going to be less on the illicit market because they aren't subject to regulation. They don't pay licensing fees. They don't have to do seed to sale tracking. All those costs get baked into the regulated price of cannabis.
Madam Chair?
Yeah, Keisha.
No, I can't really tell if I'm interrupting and Senator Brock had another.
I didn't see your hand, so I would have called on you to see. So I apologize. Keisha.
Do you want me to raise my hand? I wasn't sure.
No, I'm happy to have you just jump in.
Okay. Well, I kind of interjected before, but I do want to clarify my perspective on this, which is not just illicit market and regulated market, but that the federal landscape is changing around this being considered illicit. And just like our committee has looked at trying to give our local craft producers of beer, wine, and spirits a leg up, because that's our job, is to choose winners among in our state economy. I believe we have to start doing the same thing in looking at craft cannabis and the strong brand that Vermont has for, healthy, unique, quality cannabis versus what we're seeing from the Trump administration, which is a lot of collaboration and board involvement with groups out of Ohio and Canada, where they stand to financially benefit. This has to be something our committee looks at. And once the federal landscape changes, you're talking about THC beverages, other markets that will shift. So I just want to make sure we're not ignoring that potential reality that is being discussed at the national level.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I hope we do. And hopefully we'll continue to take that under serious consideration. I'm gonna continue to move you along. If it's okay with you, we want you to go to 10:30 and we're gonna start, liquor lottery at 10:45. If that's okay with you, like at 10:30 instead.
Yeah, I know this is like, it's hard to.
No, there's a lot here,
Yeah, there's a
and
lot.
I think on the federal piece, because that's a big thing, and I know
I'll
Tucker
just
wanted.
get right to
Yeah.
that, yeah. I mean, these are some structural challenges that cannabis businesses face that no other small business in the state faces, but, you can just look at this in your own time. And this is, it's part of my report, that was asked for.
Okay, great, because I think this would be helpful to have as for us to be thinking about as we then ask for a deeper dive into,
Right.
and we will know more. Do we have any sense of the timing on a final, I mean, I know we have an executive order that's been written, but I don't know if we have, what's the follow-up to that?
So, this is the executive order. It did two things, but as far as rescheduling goes, this is the language that was in it. Attorney General will take all necessary steps with all due speed to restart the rescheduling program that was started under Biden, the Biden administration. That was held up in court cases, and so really there is no idea of when the timeline is. Generally speaking, the Attorney General, Department of Justice is independent from the president, so it's also kind of odd that he's directing his Attorney General to do this, but I think it's a good, I think that this will happen. It seems to me like if a Republican is supporting it, the Republican administration is supporting it, I think rescheduling to Schedule 3, not descheduling, will happen. There's a lot of kind of conjecture about what Schedule 3 might mean for the cannabis industry. We're part of a regulators association. We put together a one-pager as to what we think that it will mean. And so I have just kind of the bullet points, the two big things that it will almost certainly do. If it was moved to Schedule 3 is it will allow marijuana businesses to deduct their standard business expenses, which they on the federal tax returns, which they currently cannot do. And it will also very likely open up a whole new kind of arm of research. Research institutions that take any sort of federal money cannot really possess cannabis right now. There's a very narrow pathway to do it, but this will open up a lot of research potential.
And what would it do for banking?
So, I got that on the next slide. What it will not do, moving to Schedule 3, is do anything with banking. Banking, the kind of prohibition on federally insured banks, federally chartered banks from touching cannabis funds does not change, because these products, Schedule 3 applies to FDA approved drugs. Tylenol, codeine is Schedule 3, certain steroids are Schedule 3. These cannabis products will not be FDA approved drugs. So there's not going to be interstate commerce. There's not going to be changing to the banking laws. There's probably going to be very little disruption to the state regulatory frameworks if this were to move to Schedule 3. And I linked to it in this presentation, just the one pager that I discussed from our Cannabis Regulators Association, which goes into much deeper detail on all of these points.
Right.
You're not going to need a prescription in order to access adult use cannabis. We're not going to have to change retailers into pharmacies, for instance.
So given we have no time frame yet about when this might be enacted or.
It's a rule change, yeah, it's a the DEA, or the DOJ will promulgate.
So our time frame on promulgation, what is unclear?
It's unclear, and
Rules can take 9 to 12 months, not longer. I imagine there's a lot of public comment and challenges that are gonna.
So the question I have for us is, you are already beginning to prepare for this. How nimble do we have to be to pivot to this? I guess we would appreciate from you and from Tucker, how do we prepare for this, and how can we help you prepare for this? What is there anything we need to do to enable this?
We really need to.
Can I just say, I do think there's a political element to this question, Madam Chair, that we should discuss separately, just because, that's like asking how to boil the ocean with this administration. I think we might want to hear from some national people following the politics and the market, because we do have to follow the money in some ways. The president has been a huge beneficiary of contributions from big marijuana, Curaleaf, et cetera. And there's just as much politics in this question. And
Yes.
as you know, I am working on introducing a bill that I welcome anyone to co-sponsor, that in the absence of any certainty about the federal government would just help us bolster our state, the strength of our state businesses and our state market.
Thank you.
Anything that we can do to prepare for interstate commerce when there is going to be just kind of THC gets commoditized across the country and our cultivators and our manufacturers are competing with the kind of the equivalent of, you know, Budweiser or whatever else, you know, the kind of really mass produced products. And anything we can do to prepare our market for interstate commerce is important to do while we have the time.
Okay, so anything we need to do in conjunction with that work, I assume you would begin looking at that yourselves.
Right.
I think
But
some
we
of
need
that,
to be looking at that with Tucker.
some of that has been, it's sprinkled throughout the report that we filed in November.
I think you guys, the kind of hemp market is, you know, turned into kind of a phantom cannabis market. It's really complicated. We're working on some hemp legislation with your neighbors over here.
Presenting yesterday.
And, you know, I think, it's really an important piece of the conversation, but it's also really complicated, probably not worth diving into too much, other than 2018 Farm Bill created a legal fiction between marijuana and hemp, even though they're the same plant, one plant, two names, and it's all depending on how much THC is in the plant. And people have been kind of manipulating loopholes in the way that the hemp definition was drafted to create intoxicating, high THC intoxicating products, shipping them across state lines, not subject to excise tax, not subject to age gating. These are the three main loopholes. I won't go through them all, but you know, essentially you can have more THC in some hemp products than would even be allowed in adult use cannabis, based on these loopholes. I think what's somewhat interesting about this is the federal government actually in the bill to reopen the government included a rider that tried to close these loopholes, but they delayed implementation by a year. And then the other half of the Trump executive order on rescheduling was directing his administration to work with Congress to create an acceptable minimum THC level or maximum THC level of for hemp products. So we'll see what happens there.
And this you're dealing primarily with the Ag Committee?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just
Like,
keep us.
yes, we'll keep you in the loop with what's going on over there. So, you know, I mentioned that it would be better for us to compete with the illicit market. If the goal is to compete with the illicit market, to offer some of the same products and services that the illicit market enjoys. These are all the market expansion ideas that the three of us have heard or have, you know, talked about from the outset, from 2021 when we were first appointed. These are the ideas that come up over and over and over again. So event licensing for sales, farmers markets. You guys did a lot of work on a pilot program on farmers markets last year.
Yes.
And then, it didn't cross the finish line in the House. There's on-site consumption, you know, this is
That
like,
one person, however, is gone.
that's right. Yeah. You know, people talk a lot about having on-site consumption, event licensing. This would be, you know, you have a cash bar at a wedding, you could have a cash bar, for alcohol at a wedding. You could very easily have a cash bar for cannabis at a wedding or a concert or something along those lines. There are 4 potency caps that were in the original legislation. These are in statute. One on kind of the edible serving size per package limit of THC, There's a 30% THC cap on cannabis flower, and there's a 60% on solid concentrates. None of those exist in the illicit market. So if people want to buy a 100 milligram edible in the illicit market, they can do that. I'm not saying that that's what you should do in the law, but I'm just saying, these are the differences between the regulated and the illicit market. Delivery, there's no delivery license currently. Consumption cafe gets talked about. Flipping that retail opt-in, opt-out presumption, so a town would presumably allow cannabis retail until their citizens voted to not allow it. And then it's been discussed in the past. Changing the advertising laws, having more parity with either alcohol or, as you suggested, potentially our neighboring states.
Yeah.
And then one issue that came up last year, so I included it here, is having a 2-year product registration and a 2-year employee ID card option. And then, that's discussed in this report as well, the Act 56 report. And then the other part that you asked us to look at in this Act 56 report was whether a portion of the cannabis excise tax should be dedicated to purely economic development within the cannabis industry. Julie and Kyle kind of took the lead on that portion of the report, so I'd love to give them an opportunity to talk a little about it.
So just a recap of what the Cannabis Business Development Fund is. It was a fund set up to provide low interest loans, grants, technical assistance, things like that. That fund was placed with ACCD for operation. And then sort of the companion language for the CCD was to decide who or create the criteria for who is eligible for that fund. And so we've been working together with ACCD for the last 4 or 5 years, whatever it's been, to create sort of a collaborative approach. So if you look at, from the sort of user standpoint, social equity applicant, the program that they have access to includes, those low interest loans, grants, and a great deal of technical assistance. And then also graduated fees, so they start at 0 and it steps up by 25% every year until they get to 100% in year 5. Early on, before the market started, we did some peer networking events where we talked about how to communicate with the municipality, how to set a business plan, how to talk to investors, things like that. Now all of that's moved to a consultant that does the technical assistance. So those are the things that we've been, and then recently ACCD and BTSU partnered on a weekend series of workshops with their cannabis business certification program, utilizing those professors and their articulation agreement with Vermont Law to provide a weekend series of workshops for folks. So that's how the fund's been used thus far, and we can come back with ACCD and talk a little bit more detail about where that has gone and how that money has been used. And then we have done some sort of future thinking about how to position the market, kind of the theme of the day for the next step if you want to talk about.
Sure,
And
absolutely.
we're just on the fund, is it used up now?
There is some money left. I would say that is probably because the appropriation happened before we started having licenses, but it's almost used up. So we're at a point where we're not sure where to put energy and resources because we're not sure if there will be continued funding. So, some direction from the legislature on how you view the future of that program in terms of how we view the future of the market would be really helpful.
Yeah, and again, we would love to come back with ACCD and really sink into the Cannabis Business Development Fund and these issues. But I think that as Julie just referenced, one of the challenges has been multiple times there's been one-time funding for this fund, which makes it really hard to programmatically think, in future cast how the fund should be best utilized. So if there's an opportunity for, annual funding, revolving funding, whatever you want to call it, it really helps understand the impacts both now and in the future, especially as Senator Rumsfeld hinted at. The federal landscape is changing underneath our feet. Folks are, big businesses are starting, because they'd be able to write off federal taxes, they're going to have new money injected into their businesses. They're going to start preparing for Wall Street interests into their businesses. Folks in Vermont need some type of standing to kind of really start reinvesting both knowledge and money and structural support into their businesses to be competitive even on a craft level as things start to commoditize. So one of the things we've really done, and this session, you're going to hear a lot of really awesome wants and needs on how to expand the market from a new license type perspective, how to control the product from the farm field to a consumer perspective, cannabis cafes, so on and so forth, switching the opt-in, opt-out provision. But I've really focused how to best utilize this fund from a structural support perspective over the last 6 months through the conversations with ACCD, surveying licensees, and trying to better understand the landscape of support that other commercial and agricultural businesses around the state get to enjoy from a state dollar level perspective. So there are a number of different things that we've thought of on how this fund can be utilized. Who can we open it up to beyond social equity applicants? Is it our smallest, most vulnerable cultivators who really need that support to be competitive if the federal landscape does change? Economic empowerment opportunities for folks that have that license type, veteran-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, so on and so forth. And so, some of these ideas are, how can we help alleviate the cost of testing? It's very costly to test your products, to put a product that's safe for consumer consumption into the legal market. How can we do, how can we switch narratives around outdoor or sun-grown cannabis? But I think a lot of it, really importantly, and what makes sense for this committee to really consider is how do we get the structural support from a business planning perspective, from a legal help perspective, into kind of understanding how to position your business the best way moving forward. I think in my time at the Agency of Agriculture, what the Working Lands does, stuff like that, they provide grant opportunities to buy a new piece of machinery or equipment for your business. If you've got a good business plan and you can show how you can match funding, so on and so forth, using some of the support networks to kind of move you from an incubated business to an accelerated business and compete on bigger, grander scales. So a lot of that's in this report. I know time is tight today, but would be happy to come back and talk about those.
I think you coming back would be great. We will be looking actually at stages of business development for all businesses, doesn't matter what it is, and what we offer as a state, what they need, and how we can support the things that are really helpful and productive.
I have a lot of empathy because this industry doesn't have access to so many support opportunities.
So is that the case? I mean, does it not have access to the Vermont Law School, small business, legal clinic advice?
I don't know about that specifically. They are teaching a class on cannabis at Vermont Law School. I think that there's been some conversations. I believe Senator Ron Tinsdale has some conversations with Vermont Law School. I know we're speaking.
You and I have a meeting with Vermont Law School.
Right, but nobody is jumping ahead first into supporting this market from that kind of business legal support perspective. And a lot of that's the federal entanglement and how dollars flow to these businesses. But I think there's some opportunities to consider, through state level funding and how, some of the
organizations. We have a lot of state programs and technical assistance.
Not all of them are able or willing.
Right.
Yes, I don't want to speak for them. It's hard to kind of separate out streams of funding, whether or not you're receiving federal funding or not, your risk tolerance for helping a federally illegal business challenges organization to organization. But I've had a lot of conversations with folks like the Agency of Agriculture and Working Lands programs, Farm and Forest Viability at VHCB, those kind of like the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund. There are a lot of networks that are interested, but doing it at their existing capacity is challenging. So
the Working Lands, are cannabis businesses not eligible for Working Lands?
They're not eligible from a producer perspective. I think they'll open it to like a trade association that's working in this space. I was helping the Working Lands from an Agency of Agriculture perspective in 2019, 2020, and getting hemp into that conversation was lukewarm at best. We've had some conversations that Working Lands sense that shows interest, not a want or desire necessarily to jump headfirst into it right now, but the conversations seem to be moving in a general direction where I think there could be an appetite depending on the amount of funding that they would be receiving to help.
So I hate to do this because this is such a good conversation. We haven't even gotten half of it. So we will have you back to look at the report. We have the report printed out and we need to all take a peek at it. There's a lot more to follow up here, not only a bill that we may be having, but in this conversation. So let's book another time coming up with ACCD first and foremost, and, much more to follow. This is, and I think we need to relook at some of the opportunities in the work that we did last year, because anyway, it was very frustrating to have that.
The potential is huge, Senator.
The potential is huge, absolutely, and it's an important one for us to continue to own in a way that supports the incredible market we've grown so far, and we need to protect and continue to have it flourish. So, yeah. So
Thank you very much.
And let's just chat about what the next testimony